Hey everyone, my name is Taylor Krause, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the nutritional needs of elk. You may be thinking, wow, where is this coming from? So if you don't know me, I can explain. I grew up on an elk farm in southern Illinois where we maintain about 100 head operation. One of our biggest markets right now is antler sales, but we also do sell some breeding stock and meat. So today I'm going to briefly describe how nutrition can impact antler production, reproduction, and calf growth. Starting off, we're going to look at reproduction. So research generally shows that the plane of nutrition greatly affects reproduction in both domestic ruminants and in deer. So we're going to go ahead and make the assumption that it will have similar impacts on the reproduction in elk. Taking this idea a step further, studies have shown in domestic animals that not only does nutrition impact reproduction, but the size and physical condition of the newborns are dependent upon the nutritional condition of the dam. Which brings us to one of the first studies I found looking at the impacts of nutrition during gestation and lactation on the performance of the calves. The data collected in this study showed that the individual animals indicated that the weight change of the cow towards the end of gestation was highly correlated to the calf's birth weight, the calf's average daily gain to 4 weeks of age, and to their body weight at 4 weeks of age. So you're probably thinking, yeah, weights are important, I get it, but the real key here is how important that calf's weight is to whether or not that calf is going to survive to make you money. If the calf weighs 16 kilograms at birth, it's got a 90% chance of survival. But if that calf weighs anywhere under 11.4 kilograms, its survival rate just got cut in half. That's no joke when it comes to profitability. Now, in order to keep that survival rate at the high end, that means that that cow cannot lose more than 3% of her body weight during the last 4 to 5 months of gestation. And in order for that pregnant cow to maintain her body weight, this study found that the cow needs to be eating 17.5 grams of good quality feed per kilogram of her body weight per day. Granted, this is going to fluctuate a lot depending on your resources. In this particular case, the diet was a combination of native hay and a concentrate that was 1/3 each of oats, wheat bran, and corn. That being said, the feed intake remained relatively constant, averaging about 4 kilograms per day during late gestation. After parturition, however, the intake increased substantially to about 8 kilograms per day. Keeping that in mind, when you looked at the average cow weight, their lack of weight loss suggested that the cows were able to meet most of their lactation nutrition requirements simply by increasing feed intake rather than by mobilizing their body reserves. So going to switch gears a little bit and look at it from the calf's point of view now. So the calves, we saw an increase in milk consumption from 3,100 grams on day 1 to a peak of about 4,100 grams on day 21, and then a subsequent decrease in consumption from there on out. The calves that were born to the underfed cows had reduced growth rates during the first month of life. This can be explained by two things. First is a high dependence on milk during that first month of life. The second would be that the undernourished cows probably lacked a lot of stored energy or protein in their body, thus reducing their ability to produce quality and quantity of milk. As the calves switch gears from total milk consumption during the first month of life to a mixture of dry feed intake and milk during the second month of life, we do get that expected decrease in their rate of gain. But once they acquired the ability to utilize the dry feed nutrients, we see an even higher level of growth rate during the third month than we do during the first month. Through months 3 and 4, as calf milk consumption decreases, we can see that it still does contribute quite a bit to the calf's total digestible nutrient intake at roughly 14% for dry matter, 26% for protein, and 25% for energy. So that was a really fast overview of how the maternal plane of nutrition can impact the performance of her calf. But now we're going to look at how nutrition impacts the performance of the bulls. Elk are like other livestock in that they must be fed to meet their maintenance requirements. And then whatever nutrients they have left can go towards production of things like growth, or from a producer's standpoint, meat and reproduction. However, the elk are unique in that they have an extra level of production that means a lot of potential money for the producer, and that's going to be their antler growth. Antler is essentially an annually generated bone. Weird but fairly accurate way of describing this. So, therefore, it's appropriate to study the dietary factors that impact bone development when we want to study the factors affecting antler development. These main factors are going to be energy, protein, calcium and phosphorus, and vitamins A and D. Now, don't get me wrong, nearly every nutrient going into that animal's body is going to impact antler development and growth, but for the sake of simplicity, this study started with these main players. Looking at the antler composition itself, we can see that while the antler is still growing, aka before ossification begins, the organic matter is almost entirely composed of protein. Once ossification and mineralization begins, we see a rise in mineral content, but there is still a very large presence of protein. Consequently, the levels of dietary protein affect the formation of antler, with protein restrictions being a real enemy, which we can see in the next slide. The other large player in antler composition is minerals, with the prominent two being calcium and phosphorus. It is not uncommon during antler development to see cyclic mobilization of bone to supply nutrients for antler growth, and this happens despite supplementing high concentrations of dietary minerals. Playing a slightly lesser role, but still contributing through the metabolism of minerals, are going to be the role of vitamins. The vitamins A and D have not been explicitly researched as far as antler development goes, but it is understood that vitamin D promotes calcium absorption and the mineralization of bone, while vitamin E tends to be important for antler remodeling as ossification occurs. As far as the timing of nutrient consumption relative to antler growth, a few studies have found that restricted nutrients during the winter months had negligible impacts on antler size, as long as there were enough nutrients present when the antlers actually begin to grow in the spring and summer months. From a producer standpoint, this is great news, because you can reduce the amount of feed being fed to the bull herd during the winter months in order to minimize your costs, as long as you ensure that the bulls aren't going to lose condition, because if they lose their condition and this weight loss will have potentially negative impacts on their subsequent antler growth. For instance, a poorly conditioned animal often will shed their antlers later than usual, but the antlers will still mature at the same rate as the other males, which results in a reduced growth period for that animal. Any form of hindered antler production, from a lack of mineralization to reduced antler size, is going to hurt the producer's wallet. This chart here does a really great job of summarizing the expected nutrient requirements of elk throughout any stage of production. As I mentioned on the last slide, protein restriction during antler growth can be devastating. One study restricted the protein intake to 4.5% and 9.5% from weaning until a year and a half of age. This resulted in poor animal growth and poor development of the antlers compared to the control group of animals that received 16% of protein in their diet. If you look at the chart, you can see that both of the restricted groups were well below the recommended level of crude protein during velvet growth, while the 16% was well above the recommended level. Another study found that dietary calcium and phosphorus concentrations on a dry matter basis should be adequate at about 0.45% and 0.3%, respectively, for the antler development, while the chart on the right definitely says differently. So this is going to be a prime example of how research, or a lack thereof, can result in conflicting information. In the end, the more research is always needed, especially in a species like elk where trials are few and far between. Research focusing on how to maximize not only muscle growth but antler growth in elk can mean increasing profitability for producers like myself to unimaginable gains. Elk represent a fairly untouched template with a lot of potential to unleash. It is just going to take people like myself to apply and explore the fundamentals of nutrition. So thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day.